The first thing I want to show you is one of the most important skills in Vyond, how to make changes to a scene template so it looks super custom. I will search for work and find a template that is pretty standard, pretty generic. And even though you might save some time by leaving this as it is, I think it's a mistake. I think it should be customized. Put very simply, customization is aligning a scene template to your colors, fonts, and characters. So I'm going to find my brain guide scene and add all these 5 colors from my color palette to quick access. The colors we see here are all the colors that are in scene 3 and 4 in this video by now. So the last ones are the ones that I just added. I delete my brain guide scene right after I've extracted the colors that I wanted to add to quick access. I don't need that scene anymore, so we'll just get rid of that. The first step of customization is about colors, so I'm going to find all the colors and align them to my 5 brand colors. So if I had a blue background or a green plant, I'm going to take that green color and align it to my own green color. And I go through all the things that are green, align them to my green. All the things that are yellow, I will align those to my yellow. And this is not a perfect science, but try to find all the things that look somewhat like your colors and align them. If you stumble upon colors that are not close to any of your brain colors, experiment a little. Try things out and see what looks good. And remember, if there are some assets that you don't see the colors of, it's because they are either grouped or masked. Then you just have to double click that thing in order to see what colors are in there. Now, after about a minute or two, we are done aligning the colors. So the next step of customizing a scene template is to swap the characters. Sure, it takes a little time to create custom characters, but these can be reused again and again. I've created a few of myself that I'll use in this scene, and I'll also reuse old client project custom characters just to swap those template characters so we make it look a little more custom. This tip might be a personal preference, but I like to move everything down just a little bit so it doesn't look like everything is standing right at the edge between the floor and the wall. Now we are moving into scene composition, so scene layout. How do we create a foreground, a middle ground, and a background? And what's the primary visual in this scene? What do we want to highlight? What can we move around to make it look more natural in the scene? All these things are things that we customize now after doing the colors and the characters. I also like to put a smile on the faces of these characters because by default they look pretty dull and sad. So I highlight all of them and change their expression to smiling instead of neutral. In this scene, it seems like this big visual board or screen is the primary thing, but I don't really think it is. Maybe this scene is more about the situation, this guy presenting, and therefore I'd like to make this screen a little smaller. In my Vyond lessons and tutorials here on YouTube, it might sound like I have the answer for every tiny detail in every scene, but I also experiment a lot. I move things around, I take a look at it, I figure out if I like the background color, do I like the position of that screen. I test things out and see whether it clicks or not, whether I like the look of it or not. If not, I change it. Let's say we are done with the layout of the scene now. Now we want to add some dynamics, and I really like to add a subtle zoom, some kind of movement to almost all scenes. The key word here is subtle. So make the zoom last for a little while and make the zoom small so the difference between the orange and the yellow frame isn't very big. We also want to pay attention to the actions in this scene. So this guy should be talking, happy, no lip sync, so it makes sense that he's standing there and presenting. And if this coin doesn't make sense in this scene, well, we'll just delete it because it's just a template. We don't have to keep every asset in it. In order to know what to do next, we have to preview the scene to see how it actually looks. That is Command P. Remember, use shortcuts, always. What I saw here is that I want to center align the screen over the table, and I also want to spread things out a little. Create this foreground, middle ground, and background. And this means that we have to move around our characters and the primary objects, which are the table and the laptops and the chairs and all that stuff. And you probably know this dynamic, but if you want something to appear closer, you have to make it bigger. Following that same logic, we'll make myself, this Ruid character, a little smaller and move him further backwards. A very cool and rather simple trick to create a foreground, which is often the hardest part and the part that we often leave out. Well, you can take some plants, some kind of furniture or something, but now we have these plants. We'll change the color to a lighter version of our green or a slightly darker version of our green to make it stand out a little bit. We'll make it really big and move it out to the sides. We'll create one for the left side and one for the right side, and then we'll make them huge and make them move them very very far down and to the towards the corner of the scene, and then we'll add some motion paths to them. The principle here is that this foreground is going to move in the opposite direction of the zoom. So the zoom moves us inwards into the scene, and at the same time we want this foreground to move out of the scene. Very subtle still. We make sure those two motion paths last the entire duration of the scene, and then we'll preview it to see how that dynamic works. Note the combination between the subtle zoom and the outwards moving foreground. That really draws in your attention and your eyes towards the center of the scene. But the balance is off. We have to make the middle ground a little larger, so there's a natural balance between foreground, middle ground, and background. Now the background and the middle ground was all, slapped all the way back, and now we move things a little forward by making them larger. The direction of the zoom is really, really important for where you lead the viewer's eye. Now I think the balance between foreground, middle ground, and background is much better. We have maximized the middle ground a bit, so it's also easier to see on a mobile phone, for example. I'm still not 100% pleased with the color of the background on this board, so I'll keep experimenting a little bit, trying to make it lighter or less saturated, or change the color to see if something looks better than this bluish color. But I think I will eventually end up with the same color as I started with. I always encourage my students to be relatively strict with their brand colors, but that is not to say that you can only use your brand colors for everything. I just think that the ratio between random template colors and your own brand guide colors has to be right. Use your own colors for the majority of the colors in a scene, like 80% or something, and then you can play around with the rest. You see the 3 small dots at the top left side of this window? Well, why not align them to our colors if we have the possibility to do that? Try to align as much as possible. Also this purple thing, do we have something that looks good from our brand colors? Yes, this orange is fine, so let's not leave those colors in there. The scissor could be orange, this little tip on the pencil could be orange. It all works better if it all aligns with our colors. Now you might be thinking that I've spent way too much time customizing this template scene. Well, it was just about this work environment. It doesn't matter that it's perfect. I think it does matter. I think it matters a lot how much effort you put into your stuff. The viewer will notice, the student, the watcher, the whatever, consumer, the learner will appreciate the effort you put into these things so they are aesthetically pleasing. Let's move on to something new in this scene. Next scene, I'll show you how to add gradients to a sky so it looks beautiful, and also how to add extra dynamics to a rather static scene without much enter and exit effect. Now, I can't help myself. I have to change the background color as fast as possible to get away from this template look and get over into a more custom mood. The top and bottom background colors can't be the same. We have to find a darker variation of our yellow to create this dynamic between top and bottom. And I don't have a custom darker variation, so I'm just choosing a slightly darker variation of my brand color. In order to create gradients, you have to search for light. You see, I misspelled it, but I still see a lot of light props in the contemporary library. But we actually have to go to the business-friendly library and search for light in order to find this specific spotlight prop that has like a fading out edge to it, and we can play around with its colors and then stretch it to cover the entire sky, and then it'll look like a sunset or something instead of just a plain sky. This is an advanced trick that is super fast and easy to do and adds a lot of coolness to your outdoor scenes. Now I'm just moving around with the car to figure out whether I want to place it a little downwards or keep it as it is. I think it's nice that it drives on top of the road in this scene. So I'm aligning the colors of my primary asset here to my brain colors. If I don't have any brain colors, I'm just creating slightly lighter versions of these harsh red colors. I extended the duration of this scene, and this motion path that is attached to the background's skyline didn't follow, so I'll just auto-fit it so it lasts the entire duration of the scene. In an animation tool like Vyond's, we don't have very much to work with, but we do have entry effects and exit effects, so why not add those to a template scene like this so we get a little more of an animation feel, a little more dynamics into this scene. I like to extend the duration of my enter and exit effects to 1 second or 1.5 seconds. I think that looks more professional and subtle and cool and smooth. How about that? That looks great. Much more dynamic than a scene where there's just, a static car in the middle and a moving background. Add as much animation as you can, not just to a scene with a car. This applies to all scenes. Try to add those enter and exit effects to make it more interesting to watch. In this next example, I want to show you how you can use Asset View to align all the props in a template scene to your brain guide colors in a much faster way. Now you need a certain plan, a certain Vyond plan to have access to Asset View, but if you do, I can really recommend using it because you'll see an overview of all the assets in one scene, and then you can quickly align all of them to your own colors. There are keyboard shortcuts for toggling back and forth between stage view and asset view, and I really recommend finding that keyboard shortcut article that Vyond has in their helpful resources to learn a few of those to make it easy for you to swap back and forth. Now you can see we have a transformed scene. I move it downwards as I used to, and now we have to make these characters smile. It's the same thing we do every time, right? Now we'll make a couple of copies of the same scene. I'll just hit Command C, Command VVV a couple of times, and then we have 4 copies of the same scene. The cool thing that you are about to learn is how to reuse the same scene for multiple scenes by using crops and zooms to make this conversation between a banker and 2 customers very interesting to watch instead of just having one static scene that we watch all the time. And even though we crop in very close to this woman, we can still make those subtle pans across, that subtle dynamic movement that we love, right? We did that in the beginning, and we'll also do it in this scene, because when you can create movement dynamics, do it. A common mistake is to leave too much room above the characters' heads. Don't do that. We want to position them like we do with a camera. Now we want to steer the eye towards the woman, and so we zoom in slightly and point this little arrow in the middle towards the character we want to steer the eyes towards. So now we are moving into the 4th out of 4 identical scenes with different crops and zooms, and this end scene will be a slightly zoom out to kind of conclude on the action we've just seen, like an end scene of this sequence. We usually have to do small variations of the actions going on in these scenes. We can also just make a conversational scene where nothing happens other than the mouths moving. But I think in this end scene, we want the woman to shake hand with his clients and his wife or girlfriend. And we have to change the actions of them in order to sustain or kind of support that storyline. After you've done all this work, you just have to hit preview and see how it looks in order to know what to change. Now, let's give it a spin. First, a full shot with a zoom towards the woman, steering the eye, then a close-up of the woman, pan across, then a focus on the client, and then a zoom out full scene at the end. That was a little fast, so what we'll do is that we'll extend the duration of these scenes. You can do that by dragging them, or you can use numerical values to make sure that they are all equally long. Just give them a 5-second duration. Longer scenes results in more subtle zooms, and we like that, right? So if you see the preview again, you'll see that the zoom is much slower. It's much more aesthetically pleasing to watch these slow zooms instead of these stressful harsh zooms. Now it's much more toned down, and toned down is often equal to a professional subtle feel. Subtlety, we love that word. Just a second ago, you learned about the balance between background, middle ground, and foreground, and I think these guys should be moved a little more towards the foreground slash middle ground to make them the visual focus, the primary focus of this scene. Always consider the people who will watch your lessons and videos on a small screen, on a mobile phone for example. They have to be able to see everything easily. Next, I will talk about something that one of my students brought up. He said, how do I avoid this army walk or synchronized blinking when you add some characters to a scene and you want them to enter at the same time? Their action starts at the same time, and this looks very, very weird that they do everything simultaneously. So I'll show you a few tricks for how to avoid this. And we'll just switch to the business-friendly theme because they blink more. And this is also a theme that more of you have access to. I just like the contemporary, but let's work a little bit in the business-friendly now. So I have this scene template and I've added a couple of characters, and I'll show you a few tips and tricks around this scene. And again, use keyboard shortcuts to move these people back and forth. It's very easy to do, and you don't have to right click and bring forward, bring backwards. Also, kind of micro adjust their position using the arrow keys. Keyboard shortcuts are way better than having to use the mouse all the time. You can use this distribute horizontally and vertically, but I think it's better to use your eyes and your arrow keys to make sure that they stand in the way that you want them to. Okay, so these are the guys that we want to focus on in this scene. So how do we make them stand out now that there is so much going on in the background? One simple solution is to add a square and make it transparent to different degrees. What you do is that you stretch this square across the entire scene and move it backwards between the people and the backgrounds, and then you change the opacity. So to 20, 30, 40, 50%, you can choose the opacity you want. It's the purpose is to make a clear distinction between what's in the foreground and the background, because the background is not important. We want to look at the people in the foreground, and because it's not important, we will just go ahead and lock the entire background in this scene. So I'll move these people out of the way, out of the canvas, highlight the entire scene, and then just unlock the transparent square, mark everything, and then lock everything. So now we can work with our characters on top of all these other assets of the poster and the mirror and the door without accidentally clicking anything we don't want to move or click, and this just makes our lives so much easier. As I said in the beginning of this scene, the main purpose, the main lesson to be learned in this section of the video, this tutorial, is to have a crowd of people, multiple characters enter at the same time or do an action at the same time without it looking weird and robotic. You see, if they all enter, they all put their hands on their hips simultaneously. We want to avoid this so it looks more natural. And the solution is wonderfully simple. What you do is that you make small variations in the enter effect timing. So some enter slightly before others, and their action sequence, their animation sequence starts a little bit before the others, and now they all do the same, but it looks much more natural because there is small variations in when they do it. But hey, Ruud, you talked about this army walk. What's that about? Let me just copy these people into a new scene and show you what it looks like if we make them all walk from left to right without applying any advanced expert Vyond tricks, as you are about to learn. As in the scene before, we will give them all the same action. And if you give 5 characters the same action with the same enter effect, they will do it simultaneously. We've just learned how to avoid that. But what about walking? That's like a continuous action. That has nothing to do with enter effects, really. That's more choosing an action and then applying a motion path so they walk from A to B. But how do we make their feet not walk simultaneously so it looks like it's coordinated like a military group or something? Let's first preview this scene and see how it looks like when we've done nothing, what it looks like, what the situation looks like that we want to avoid, because it just looks weird. And I'll just add somewhat of a background with my own brand colors, right? Make it a little lighter, just so we have something to look at. The army walk. Yes, that looks kind of weird. Why do they walk like that? We want to avoid that, make them all have their own pace, or just variations of the same pace, really. The fix here is, well, we could apply some enter effects, make them fly in and at different times, but I think it's cooler and more natural to move everyone out of the scene except the first person, and then add an enter effect called instant. So they actually won't be anywhere until this instant enter effect happens. But if they enter outside the canvas, we won't be able, or we won't see that, and that's a good thing. A lot of talk. I think it's just easier if you see it, right? So now I'm going to do like in the previous scene and space out the enter effect of these people. But they will enter outside the canvas, and that means that the looping of their feet will start at different times. And now you can see what that looks like. You won't be able to see the enters, but you will see that they now have different looping walking strides, and this looks much more natural, and that's what we're after. If you can't have your characters come in from the side of the canvas or outside the canvas, you can use camera to crop out a part of the scene and make your characters come in from the side there. This last example or situation is a conceptual scene where I'll be showing you how to add multiple layers of professionalism to the same conceptual scene. So we'll have a super simple scene design with a green background color. Well, that's my brand color. I usually use a clean version of that in my conceptual scenes. And then I'll find some good looking props from the contemporary library, laptop, 2 laptops actually, and make them somewhat the same size, position them in the middle. And what I want these 2 props to do is that I want them to switch positions using motion paths. Again, this is not a specific lesson in how to make 2 laptops switch position. It's a lesson in how to use the features in Vyond, for example, around motion paths, to make that whole feel a little more delicious than just these very standard transitions you can have. So now I've created a curved motion path with it's just a regular motion path where they switch sides. So what can we do? We can add easing. Ease in out is just a great thing that I think you should add to almost all motion paths. Already this looks much more professional, that they accelerate into the action and they decelerate out of the action. You can also add rotation, either clockwise or counterclockwise. We'll just add 1 rotation. We'll have to preview this to decide whether they should rotate one or the other direction. I think this was a little chaotic. They almost collided. So what we'll do is that we'll just check out the other option, the clockwise rotation, and see how that looks. Will that be a more, harmonic relation? Yes, now they are kind of in sync, beautifully passing each other through that motion path. Another layer you can add to this scene is to create camera movements. We will do a slight zoom out, and as you'll see, you almost can't see it when there's no background. So it looks good. Maybe we will add a background to this conceptual scene to make the zoom more apparent. Think about how you can add layers to your scenes and make them look more professional. Play around with it, add a background, align it to your brand color, a little bit of camera movement, apply these motion paths and preview it to see how it looks now. Is this the look you're going for? You could always do more to your scenes. And this is also a trap, perfectionism, to fall into, right? You have to stop at some points. But play around with it and see if you can find that super cool, subtle gradient background with that zoom, changing position with ease in, ease out. I think it's a joy to create and a joy to watch this layering of different effects and features on top of each other to make your videos stand out a little bit in this very template-based tool.